By the winter of 1944, the Eastern Front had become a graveyard for both men and machines. The German lines, though retreating, were defended with ruthless precision. And above them, the skies burned daily with duels between Soviet and Luftwaffe pilots. Duels that rarely left survivors. Among those who flew these desperate missions was Mikhail Devyatayev, a young Soviet pilot from the 104th Guards Fighter Regiment. He was experienced, disciplined, and fiercely loyal. The kind of man whose calm under pressure made him invaluable to his squadron. His aircraft, a Yak-9 fighter, was his second home. For months, he had fought over the Baltic, strafing German convoys and intercepting bombers that tried to strike Leningrad. Each mission left new scars on his aircraft and his nerves, but he kept flying. On February 13, 1944, Devyatayev took off for what was supposed to be a routine sortie. His task: disrupt German movements near the Dnieper and protect a Soviet column moving below. The sky was gray, heavy with low clouds and smoke. The Germans were waiting. Moments after crossing the front line, a flak battery opened up, sending orange tracer fire across the sky. Devyatayev pulled into a sharp roll, diving to avoid the barrage. But one burst found its mark, a direct hit to the right wing. Flames raced across the fuselage. The Yak bucked and twisted. Devyatayev tried to hold it steady, but his instruments were dead, his cockpit filling with black smoke. For a few heartbeats, he refused to let go. Soviet pilots were taught that capture was worse than death. But when the heat began to melt the leather of his gloves, he knew there was no choice. He ripped open the canopy and hurled himself into the freezing air. The wind struck like a hammer. His parachute snapped open, jerking his body violently. Below him stretched a white wasteland, fields of snow cut by trenches and burned-out armor. He landed hard, rolling through the drifts. Before he could unclip his harness, he heard the shouts of German infantry. His revolver was gone. His legs could barely move. Within minutes, he was surrounded. They tore off his flight insignia, kicked away his boots, and dragged him toward a waiting truck. He was beaten, interrogated, and tagged as a Russian airman, captured alive. For a pilot, that tag was a death sentence. Over the following weeks, he was transferred from one holding site to another, each worse than the last. By the time he reached the camp at Peenemünde, the nerve center of Germany's secret Phi-2 rocket program, he was a shadow of himself. Around him, skeletal prisoners in striped uniforms marched through snow, carrying pieces of metal larger than their bodies. Devyatayev realized he was standing in the heart of a machine designed not just for war, but for terror. The Germans tested new weapons here, rockets that would one day rain destruction on London and Antwerp. The guards treated prisoners as expendable parts in that machine. Yet, even here, amid starvation and cruelty, Devyatayev's instinct as a pilot refused to die. He studied the guards' routines, the airfield's layout, and the aircraft that took off daily into the gray Baltic sky. Somewhere deep in his mind, a single, insane idea began to grow. If he could reach one of those planes, if he could fly again, he could escape hell itself. The gates of Peenemünde loomed like a fortress high and foreboding, topped with barbed wire that glittered under the pale winter sun. Mikhail Devyatayev had never seen a place so deliberately designed to crush hope. Inside, the camp stretched for kilometers, rows of wooden barracks, metal sheds, and open-air workyards where prisoners labored under the icy Baltic wind. Each building smelled of smoke, sweat, and rust, the mingling scent of life grinding into submission. From the moment he arrived, Devyatayev understood the rules: follow orders, survive, and keep your head down. Guards patrolled constantly, rifles slung across their shoulders, eyes alert for the slightest hesitation. Prisoners were immediately divided: engineers, laborers, and special prisoners assigned to secret projects. Devyatayev, tagged as a captured pilot, was considered useful only for his mechanical skills and physical endurance. Inside the barracks, he found himself among men from across the Eastern Front: soldiers, sailors, and civilians, all trapped in the same shadow of death. Some had endured months without proper food or warmth. Others carried injuries that were left untreated, their limbs stiff with frostbite or infection. For Devyatayev, the cold was physical, but the despair was the true enemy. Every day, he witnessed men broken by hunger, fear, and the constant surveillance of the SS guards. Yet even in this despair, he noticed patterns. Guards rotated shifts predictably, their routines marked by strict punctuality. Aircraft took off from the nearby airfield at dawn, returning in the late afternoon. Supplies were delivered on schedules that, if memorized, revealed gaps in supervision. For a pilot used to observing patterns in the chaos of battle, these small details became lifelines. Devyatayev's assigned work involved transporting components for the V-2 rockets. Every day, he carried crates of metal through snow-choked roads, passing aircraft lined up along the airfield. He memorized each plane: the Heinkel, WWII bombers, the Messerschmitt Bf-109s, noting which were operational and which were heavily guarded. The thought took root slowly, audacious and insane. I can fly one of them. I can take one and escape. The first nights were the hardest. He lay awake on the thin straw of his bunk, listening to the wind whistle through cracks in the barracks and to the distant rumble of German aircraft. Every shadow that moved outside seemed a threat. Every door that slammed shut was a warning. But the fear also sharpened him. He began calculating in precise mental detail how an escape could unfold, which guards to avoid, what time of day was safest, which bomber could lift him beyond the camp's reach. He learned to move silently through the barracks, to blend in during inspections, to keep his eyes and ears alert. In small moments, carrying fuel cans, fixing a wheel, or sweeping a hangar, he rehearsed the impossible. Every observation, every note memorized became a thread in a plan that had to succeed: the theft of a Luftwaffe aircraft. By the end of his first month, Devyatayev had internalized the rhythms of Peenemünde. He had become invisible in plain sight, a man among men, yet thinking constantly about the skies and freedom. The camp, designed to destroy the human spirit, had inadvertently given him the opportunity to learn the precise moments where death and escape balanced on the same edge. And in that harsh winter, as frost coated his hair and hands, one thought dominated every waking hour: the He-111 is my wings, and I will fly it home. In the belly of Peenemünde, beneath the watchful eyes of the SS and the thunder of test engines, Mikhail Devyatayev began to assemble something far more dangerous than any sabotage: a plan to steal an aircraft and fly out of the camp. The idea was simple in its audacity and complicated in every detail. Seize a serviceable bomber from the Luftwaffe field, start its engines, take off, cross enemy skies, and reach Soviet lines. It was the sort of plan that belonged to novels and fever dreams, not to men who woke to frost on their blankets and the bark of guards at dawn. Yet the more Devyatayev looked, the more the possibility revealed itself. He did not dream of lone glory. Instead, he methodically read the camp as a pilot reads wind and cloud. He cataloged guard shifts, supply deliveries, and the routines of mechanics. He watched which aircraft were moved last and which hangars were locked more tightly than others. He took note of the small practicalities that became the bones of any viable escape. When vehicles left for fuel depots, when the night watch thinned, where repair crews kept tools, and how the access roads cut through the perimeter. Each observation reduced the abstract idea of escape into a sequence of manageable steps. Devyatayev moved quietly, earning the trust, or at least the tolerance, of other prisoners whose skills mattered. He sought men who understood engines and flight systems, men who could work at speed and keep cool when everything collapsed. There were machinists from the East, laborers who had handled bomber components, even men who had once served in airfields. He listened to them and learned what they knew about the Heinkel, the 11 ones that lined the field nearby. Which ones had fresh spark plugs, which carried enough serviceable instruments to navigate by, which had been left in a hurry and might still start. The plan required more than men. It required timing and deception. The prisoners rehearsed movements in whispers, mimicked the paths of mechanics, moved crates to hide their footprints, and memorized the cadence of salutes so they could pass briefly as workers. They scavenged small tools, a screwdriver here, a wrench there, concealed them beneath straw and in the seams of bundled clothing. At night, Devyatayev walked the perimeter in the dark, tracing the route they would take to the hangar, marking the blind spots where sentries' lantern light did not reach. Risk multiplied with each new necessity. They needed fuel, enough to lift a heavy bomber across hostile airspace. They needed to start the engines without alerting nearby guards or mechanics. They needed a pilot at the controls who could manage unfamiliar instruments and radio silence, a navigator who could steer by landmarks and river bends, and the resolve to commit to the takeoff under threat of immediate firing. Perhaps the most dangerous requirement was human trust. In a place where hunger and fear stripped men to instinct, trusting another's silence and steady hands could not be assumed. Devyatayev selected companions not for flair, but for reliability, those who had shown steadiness under beatings and kept secrets when survival demanded it. Small favors were exchanged quietly, a bun saved, a wrapped hand warmed, a whispered encouragement at midnight. Bonds formed, brittle yet enough. They rehearsed the movements in their heads until they were reflex. On paper, the plan was a list of contingencies. If the fuel drums were guarded, gather from the supply convoy. If the starter was gone, improvise a hand crank. If the alarm sounded, throttle up and take off immediately. It was all contingencies and courage stitched together. Every great plan contains a moment when the mind must stop analyzing and the body must act. For Devyatayev and the men he had gathered, that moment would come when the mechanics finished their evening tea, when the guard rotation left a seam in the watch, and when the sky itself offered the thin mercy of a winter night. Until then, the impossible remained a calculation, a set of odds that, if beat, would transform prisoners into fugitives and an aircraft into a key to freedom. As the winter nights deepened, Pienemunde transformed into a frozen labyrinth of steel and snow. By day, the camp was an oppressive machine of order and brutality. By night, its routines offered rare, fleeting gaps, where Devyatayev and his comrades could move without immediate detection. He had studied every detail, the rotation of sentries, the timing of flashlight sweeps, the sound of distant engines, even the muffled footsteps of officers returning to the mess hall. Everything was predictable, and predictable was survivable. The night chosen for the escape was moonless, the sky a dense black that swallowed the airfield in shadows. The prisoners gathered silently, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Each man knew his role. Some were to block or misdirect any late patrolling guards. Others carried the small tools and improvised equipment needed to start the aircraft. Devyatayev himself approached the Heinkel. He's 111 with measured steps, scanning the surrounding hangars and ensuring the perimeter was clear. The bomber towered above him, its twin engines cold and inert, yet filled with the promise of liberation. Every second was a test of nerves. The guards' lanterns moved like phantom eyes across the snow. One wrong move, one snap of a boot, could have brought a hail of bullets. Yet Devyatayev's calm was unshakable. He ran through the sequence in his mind. Unlock the engine panels, check fuel, start the auxiliary systems, ignite the main engines. He visualized the taxi to the runway, the takeoff, and the climb into the dark expanse over the Baltic. In his mind, the impossible had become a series of precise, manageable steps. The prisoners worked swiftly, crates were shifted to obscure tracks, doors gently latched, tools placed exactly where needed. Each movement was choreographed to perfection. When the engines finally roared to life, a controlled vibration ran through the airfield, the sound swallowed by the vast blackness. Devyatayev climbed into the cockpit, checking instruments under dim moonlight. The controls felt familiar, yet alien. This was not his yak. It was a German machine designed for destruction, now a vessel of salvation. As he taxied toward the runway, he could hear the low murmur of his companions guiding him silently. The runway stretched before him, ice glinting faintly under the minimal light. Behind him, the camp slept, unaware that one of its prisoners was about to defy its order entirely. Every heartbeat matched the drone of the engines. Every breath was measured. Finally, he released the brakes. The Heinkel surged forward, wheels skimming the icy surface, picking up speed with terrifying acceleration. The horizon rose to meet him as the bomber lifted from the ground. Below, the camp shrank to a patchwork of lights and shadows. The snowfields stretched endlessly, dotted with the occasional flare of distant gunfire, yet none aimed at him. As he climbed into the dark sky, Devyatayev knew there would be no second chances. Every turn, every adjustment of throttle, every evasive maneuver would determine whether freedom or death awaited. The wind tore past, the night sky wrapped him in cold and silence. And yet, for the first time in months, he was unbound, soaring over the very place that sought to hold him captive. The Heinkel's engines sang a song of defiance, carrying not just a man, but the hopes of all who remained behind in the camp. Each passing moment brought them farther from the immediate danger and closer to the unknown, the perilous flight over hostile territory that would decide whether they would live or die. The Heinkel. He-111 tore through the frigid night air, its engines a deep, resonant roar that drowned out all other sound. Beneath him, the snow-covered landscape of Pienemunde receded, its watchtowers and hangars reduced to tiny, indistinct shapes. Mikhail Devyatayev gripped the controls tightly, his mind racing through every lesson he had ever learned as a Soviet pilot. This was no dogfight. It was survival, navigation, and nerve stretched to their absolute limits. The first challenge came almost immediately. Searchlights, trained on the perimeter for routine night inspections, swept across the runway. Devyatayev banked sharply, weaving the bomber through darkness and shadow, avoiding the brilliant beams that could betray his escape. The cold wind pressed against the fuselage, but the bomber's sturdy frame held firm. Every instrument had to be monitored. Any misread altitude, throttle, or rudder adjustment could spell disaster. He glanced at his companions in the rear, men who had risked everything to aid him. Their eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. They had rehearsed every step, but the reality of flight over enemy territory was unforgiving. The Baltic coast stretched out ahead, and over its frozen waters, German patrol aircraft could appear at any moment. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Devyatayev charted a course based on memory, following the faint outlines of rivers and forests. Landmarks he had memorized during forced labor sorties along the coast. The Heinkel was slower than the Soviet fighters he knew, and less responsive, but it had the advantage of size, allowing them to avoid minor detection from distant radar posts. Every shadow, every flash of light, kept their hearts pounding. Soon, the first German aircraft appeared, a lone Bf-109 patrolling the area. Devyatayev tightened his grip and climbed sharply, banking to obscure the bomber's silhouette against the clouds. Tracers streaked past, but none found their mark. The Heinkel shuddered as it climbed to higher altitude, the cold seeping into every crevice of the fuselage. In that moment, time became a sequence of calculations. Altitude, speed, heading, enemy positions, and distance to Soviet lines. Fuel levels were another concern. The bomber had enough for the journey, but any detour or evasive maneuver could leave them stranded over hostile territory. Devyatayev's training as a fighter pilot, his knowledge of aircraft mechanics, and his relentless focus combined into a single point of precision. Keep the Heinkel airborne, keep it on course, keep everyone alive. Hours seemed to pass as they traversed the frozen northern landscapes. Villages appeared like ghost towns, smoke rising from chimneys, but no friendly signals awaited them. Each second brought them closer to Soviet territory, yet the fear never abated. Every creaking metal panel, every vibration from the engines, was a reminder that they were flying a plane built for war over the very people they had once fought against. Finally, faint signs of Soviet control appeared. Distant silhouettes of forests marked on maps, reconnaissance posts, recognized by subtle signal flares and the changing pattern of roads that led toward friendly lines. Relief began to mix with exhaustion. The impossible plan had survived its first test. Devyatayev exhaled slowly, but there was no time for celebration. Enemy aircraft could still appear, and every misstep could reverse the miracle of the escape. But for the first time in months, the cold dread of captivity began to lift. Above the frozen lands, in the vast, dark expanse of the winter sky, they were free. And free, for now, was enough. The Heinkel 111 sliced through the night sky, carrying not only Mikhail Devyatayev and his companions, but also the fragile hope of survival. Beneath them stretched enemy territory, a labyrinth of forests, frozen rivers, and villages bristling with patrols. The winter air was sharp, biting through the bomber's fuselage, reminding every man on board that danger had not ended with takeoff. Navigating without instruments they fully trusted, Devyatayev relied on memory, instinct, and fleeting glimpses of landmarks. The northern rivers glimmered faintly under the starlight, Roads snaked between snow-draped towns, and occasional train tracks reflected distant flashes of German patrol lights. Every deviation from their planned route increased the risk of detection, and the margin for error was minimal. It was not just the Germans they feared. The Heinkel was unfamiliar, its controls heavier and less responsive than the Soviet fighters Devyatayev had mastered. The engines emitted occasional sputters, and a sudden drop in air pressure threatened to disrupt their climb. Each movement demanded careful calculation. A slight miscalculation could send them spiraling into the frozen forests below. Halfway across the coast, a squadron of German Focke-Wulf FW-190s appeared, alerted perhaps by distant radar or routine patrols. Devyatayev adjusted the bomber's course sharply, banking into a cloud cover that offered temporary concealment. Bullets traced white arcs against the darkness, ricocheting from the Heinkel's fuselage, but failing to find their target. In the cramped cockpit, hands sweaty from tension, Devyatayev guided the plane with precision, every motion deliberate. Inside the bomber, his companions whispered calculations for speed, fuel, and distance, their voices muffled against the roar of the engines. They had trained for survival, but no training could fully prepare them for this impossible flight. The unbroken stretch of hostile skies, with the enemy everywhere but victory nowhere yet. Time lost meaning. Hours felt like days as they navigated over German-occupied villages, past anti-aircraft batteries, and through patches of thick fog that hid them from patrols yet threatened to disorient the inexperienced crew. Devyatayev relied on the landmarks memorized from his forced labor around Peenemünde, cross-checking them with instinct and horizon lines. Every forest, every river bend, every railway bridge was a lifeline guiding them home. Exhaustion gnawed at their minds, but adrenaline and resolve pushed them forward. Food, warmth, even sleep, all were luxuries they could not afford. Each passing mile increased both hope and peril. To retreat was impossible. To falter meant death or recapture. Finally, in the distance, the faint outline of the Peene River, partially frozen and flowing west, appeared. Beyond it lay the first signs of Soviet-controlled territory. Relief began to mingle with cautious vigilance. The danger was far from over, but they were closer than ever to freedom. Every man on board knew that one wrong turn, one unexpected patrol, could undo all they had risked. And still, the Heinkel climbed steadily, defiant against the night, defiant against the impossibility of their flight. The frozen landscape below seemed endless, yet each mile brought them closer to the embrace of home, to the moment when captivity would finally end. The horizon slowly brightened with the first hints of dawn, though the cold air remained unyielding. Below, the dense forests and frozen rivers of the Eastern Front stretched for miles, a patchwork of white and shadow. Devyatayev knew that the hardest part of the flight was yet to come, navigating the final stretch into Soviet-controlled territory, where any mistake could still leave them exposed to enemy patrols or misidentified as hostile aircraft. Fatigue weighed heavily on the men inside the Heinkel. The roar of the twin engines had become a constant, almost deafening companion. Hands cramped on throttles and controls, eyes strained against the dimming dark. Yet no one dared speak above a whisper. Every glance outside the cockpit demanded vigilance. Isolated anti-aircraft emplacements could still fire without warning, and any suspicious movement on the ground might summon enemy fighters. As they approached the first recognizable Soviet outposts, Devyatayev focused on precision. The rivers and towns once memorized during his early sorties and mapped in his mind now guided them with the clarity of a lifeline. His companions scanned the horizon, watching for signal flares or other indicators of friendly forces. Communication was impossible. Any noise, even a single shout, could be fatal. A single misjudgment could trigger catastrophic consequences. Approaching too low might expose them to the enemy. Too high could leave them disoriented over the unfamiliar terrain. Devyatayev's knowledge of both the Heinkel and the region became crucial. Every adjustment, every gentle turn kept them on course. Moments of fear punctuated the journey. Faint silhouettes in the distance raised the specter of enemy aircraft. But each time Devyatayev adjusted altitude and bearing, they passed unnoticed. The bomber shuddered under the strain of heavy maneuvers, yet held firm, a vessel forged for war now carrying hope. The first Soviet guards appeared, their rifles raised, eyes wide with disbelief. Recognition was slow. The Heinkel's markings were foreign, and the situation extraordinary. Devyatayev executed precise maneuvers to signal his intentions, banking the plane, flashing lights, lowering the landing gear carefully. For seconds that felt like hours, the tension was absolute. Finally, the bomber descended onto the frozen runway of a Soviet airfield. Wheels skidded slightly on ice, but Devyatayev maintained control, guiding the Heinkel to a safe stop. Relief flooded through the cabin, though exhausted bodies were still tense from the hours of concentrated effort. The impossible had been achieved. They had crossed enemy territory in a captured aircraft and landed in safety. As the men disembarked, Soviet officers rushed forward, their initial suspicion turning into astonishment. The story that a single pilot had escaped Peenemünde with a Luftwaffe Heinkel would spread quickly, becoming legendary among airmen and soldiers alike. For Devyatayev and his companions, however, the moment was intensely personal. The first breaths of freedom after months of fear, brutality, and near-certain death. Though the war would continue, and danger remained on other fronts. This flight marked a profound triumph of courage, ingenuity, and unyielding will. For Mikhail Devyatayev, the sky had once again belonged to him, not as a prisoner, but as a pilot who had stolen freedom itself. The quiet of Peenemünde that followed Mikhail Devyatayev's daring escape was deceptive. For the German guards and engineers, the disappearance of a Heinkel 111 in the dead of night sent shockwaves through the camp. Investigations began immediately, with interrogations, roll calls, and searches stretching across the airfield and surrounding barracks. Every officer demanded answers, yet none could piece together how a single prisoner had seized a heavily guarded bomber and vanished into the winter sky. Inside the camp, tension mounted. Prisoners whispered rumors of a daring flight, stories that seemed impossible, yet carried an electric charge of hope. Guards increased patrols, inspections became stricter, and the atmosphere shifted from rigid order to paranoia. Every movement of a prisoner, every clatter of tools or misaligned crate, could now be interpreted as a potential accomplice to Devyatayev's escape. Back in Soviet territory, news of the stolen bomber spread slowly at first, then with growing astonishment. Commanders and pilots could scarcely believe the report. A man had flown a German aircraft from one of their most secretive installations, carrying himself and a few comrades safely over enemy lines. Devyatayev's ingenuity and bravery were acknowledged immediately, though the full scale of the feat would only become widely understood with time. The escape also had strategic repercussions. The Luftwaffe was forced to reassess security at Peenemünde and other secret facilities, realizing that even their most rigid systems were vulnerable to observation, cunning, and audacity. Operations were delayed, aircraft deployments scrutinized more closely, and an air of caution replaced confidence among German engineers and pilots. For Devyatayev and his companions, the aftermath was a mixture of triumph and uncertainty. While the immediate danger of capture had ended, they knew that their lives would forever be defined by this single act. The flight had placed them in an extraordinary position, heroes to some, anomalies to others. Yet there was no time to dwell on fame. The war was still raging, and the Soviet forces still needed every experienced hand in the sky. Devyatayev's return also underscored a deeper reality. The human spirit, even when surrounded by cruelty and oppression, could engineer freedom. His careful observation, technical skill, and unwavering determination had overcome the impossible. Every twist of metal, every calculation of speed and altitude had brought him and his comrades home, a profound testament to courage under unimaginable pressure. In the weeks following the escape, Peenemünde remained under heightened security. But whispers of the pilot who stole a plane traveled beyond the camp walls. Among prisoners, the story became a quiet legend, inspiring those still trapped to consider survival and resistance in new ways. Devyatayev's audacity would ripple through history, a singular moment that showed how knowledge, timing, and bravery could pierce even the most impenetrable walls. Upon landing safely behind Soviet lines, Mikhail Devyatayev and his companions were immediately debriefed by Soviet military intelligence. The Heinkel 111, a prized German bomber, was inspected with meticulous attention, its controls and mechanical systems analyzed for both intelligence and training purposes. Devyatayev's first-hand knowledge of enemy aircraft and operations was invaluable. The information he provided would aid Soviet pilots and engineers in future engagements against the Luftwaffe. News of his daring escape traveled swiftly through military channels. Officers and comrades alike were awed by the combination of skill, courage, and ingenuity required to steal a fully operational enemy bomber and navigate hundreds of kilometers over hostile territory. Devyatayev, once just another pilot, became a symbol of audacious bravery and relentless determination. His actions were formally recognized, and he received commendations that acknowledged not only his heroism, but also the strategic value of his achievement. Despite the accolades, Devyatayev remained humble. The flight had been a collaboration. His companions had risked their lives as well. He credited meticulous planning, disciplined observation, and the shared courage of his comrades for their survival. Yet history would remember him as the central figure of one of the most extraordinary escape stories of World War II. The impact extended beyond the personal. Soviet military strategists studied the escape in detail, identifying both vulnerabilities in German airfield security and opportunities to exploit enemy routines. The intelligence gathered from the Heinkel informed subsequent operations and provided insight into Luftwaffe procedures that might have otherwise remained obscure. Devyatayev's experience also served as a morale booster for Soviet troops. Stories of his escape circulated among airmen and soldiers, inspiring confidence and resilience. Here was proof that even in the most controlled and dangerous situations, careful planning, courage, and technical skill could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. Yet, for Devyatayev, the recognition was only part of the story. The deeper reward was the reclamation of freedom, the affirmation of his own capabilities, and the knowledge that human ingenuity could outmatch even the most sophisticated machinery and rigidly enforced systems. His journey from prisoner to pilot of a stolen bomber would endure as a testament to audacity, endurance, and the unyielding human spirit that perseveres in the face of war. Mikhail Devyatayev's escape was more than a personal triumph. It became a mission of strategic significance. The stolen Heinkel 111 was examined by Soviet engineers and intelligence officers, revealing weaknesses in Luftwaffe operations, maintenance routines, and airfield security. Every panel inspected, every system analyzed, provided insights into German aircraft design and operational protocols that would aid future Soviet missions. The flight also demonstrated the vulnerabilities inherent in even the most heavily guarded enemy installations. Peenemünde had been considered impenetrable, its secret programs shielded behind layers of guards, barbed wire, and watchtowers. Yet a single pilot, armed with observation, courage, and knowledge of aircraft mechanics, had not only penetrated this security, but escaped intact. Soviet military strategists recognized the implications. Meticulous planning, daring, and exploitation of enemy routines could yield outsized results in wartime operations. Devyatayev's story spread quickly among air units. Pilots studied the route he had flown, noting how he navigated enemy territory using rivers, forests, and minimal instruments. His audacity became a teaching point in military academies, illustrating how improvisation and courage could complement conventional strategy. Engineers studied the Heinkel itself, its robust construction and systems informing the Soviet understanding of German bomber capabilities. Beyond technical knowledge, the escape carried profound psychological weight. Soldiers, airmen, and officers were inspired by a vivid demonstration of human determination and ingenuity. The story proved that even in the darkest circumstances, bold thinking could disrupt enemy plans, undermine morale, and alter the course of events. Devyatayev had not only survived, he had gained intelligence, inspired his comrades, and become a symbol of daring resilience. Historians later noted that the flight indirectly influenced Soviet operations against the V-2 rocket program. The intelligence gathered from the captured Heinkel informed aerial reconnaissance, sabotage plans, and training exercises. By turning enemy technology into a tool of liberation, Devyatayev's escape became a rare example of tactical brilliance combined with human heroism. Even decades later, the audacity of his flight remained remarkable. The sky, once a battlefield, became a path to freedom and an emblem of ingenuity that inspired generations. For Mikhail Devyatayev, the stolen Heinkel was more than an aircraft. It was a vehicle of hope, proof that the human spirit could triumph over oppression and war. Although Mikhail Devyatayev had crossed into Soviet territory, the consequences of his escape rippled far behind him. Peenemünde erupted in chaos the following morning. The disappearance of a fully operational Heinkel 111, along with the audacious flight of a prisoner, humiliated the German command and ignited an exhaustive manhunt. Sentries were questioned, barracks torn apart, and patrols intensified across the surrounding forests and airfields. Every German officer understood that such a breach, no matter how isolated, revealed vulnerabilities that could no longer be ignored. Orders were issued to track the stolen bomber, using any available Luftwaffe assets. Searchlights swept the coastlines and rivers, while reconnaissance aircraft scoured the skies in systematic sweeps. Devyatayev's flight route, though partly predictable, was shrouded in darkness and snow, making interception a near-impossible challenge. Still, every patrol, every flare, heightened the tension for the men aboard the Heinkel, who knew that one misstep could still cost them their lives, even after the daring escape. Back in Peenemünde, rumors swirled among prisoners. Some whispered that their comrade had flown the Heinkel beyond enemy lines. Others feared brutal reprisals. Guards reacted with increased brutality, and prisoners caught, even glancing at the wrong place, were punished severely. Yet beneath the fear, a quiet admiration took root. The audacity of the act, planning, coordination, and execution, became legendary within the walls, inspiring whispers of hope that human ingenuity could outmatch even the most disciplined machine of war. Meanwhile, Devyatayev navigated his bomber with precision, fully aware of the German response. Every river, ridge, and wooded area became both a landmark and a shield, concealing the Heinkel from search aircraft. His experience as a fighter pilot allowed him to anticipate potential intercepts and adjust altitude, speed, and course to evade detection. The cold, the fatigue, and the constant hum of engines blended into a heightened state of awareness. Every second required complete concentration. Any lapse could invite a German fighter or anti-aircraft battery into deadly range. Even as the Nazi pursuit raged across the Baltic skies, the Heinkel pressed forward. The psychological pressure of knowing that enemy planes could appear at any moment intensified the stakes, but also underscored the brilliance of Devyatayev's planning. The very act that infuriated the Luftwaffe, a single man stealing their bomber, was a testament to courage, observation, and calculated risk. By the time the first signs of Soviet territory appeared on the horizon, the Heinkel had successfully outmaneuvered every patrol and avoided detection. The Nazi pursuit, relentless in its intent, had failed. Devyatayev's escape was not just a triumph of flight and skill. It was a profound demonstration that audacity and intelligence could overcome even the most formidable defenses. The flight would soon be remembered not merely as an escape, but as an emblem of human ingenuity in wartime. The first sight of friendly territory brought a surge of relief to Mikhail Devyatayev and his companions. After hours of tense flight over enemy-controlled land, the frozen forests and rivers of Soviet-held ground stretched below like a promise of safety. But even in these final moments, caution remained paramount. Any misidentification could result in tragic, friendly fire, and the tension inside the Heinkel was far from over. As they approached the designated airfield, signals from Soviet troops became visible. Carefully positioned flares and markers indicating a safe landing zone. Devyatayev adjusted the bomber's altitude and speed, keeping a steady hand on the controls while ensuring the landing gear would engage smoothly on the icy runway. The engines roared under full throttle, the vibration a constant reminder of the risks they had already survived. Touching down, the bomber skidded slightly on the frozen surface, but Devyatayev managed to bring it safely to a stop. Exhausted and frostbitten, the men climbed out of the cockpit, greeted by the stunned faces of Soviet guards and officers. The shock quickly turned to admiration as the reality sank in. A Luftwaffe Heinkel, stolen from Peenemünde, had arrived intact with its crew alive. Soviet forces immediately secured the bomber and conducted preliminary inspections, marveling at both the audacity of the flight and the condition of the aircraft. Devyatayev was escorted to commanding officers, where he recounted the flight in broad strokes, careful not to reveal any unnecessary details that could compromise operational security. His calm, precise account emphasized planning, observation, and technical skill, underscoring why such an extraordinary feat had succeeded. The reunion was deeply emotional for Devyatayev's companions. Many had endured weeks of near starvation, grueling labor, and the constant threat of death. Their escape had been planned with exacting care, but the reality of freedom brought tears and laughter alike. For Soviet forces, the return of these men, along with the captured aircraft, was more than a morale boost. It was a tangible demonstration of courage, skill, and the impact one individual could have on the course of operations. Devyatayev himself remained focused, aware that the war still raged and his duty was far from over. Yet he allowed himself a moment to feel the weight of accomplishment. The impossible flight, planned under the harshest conditions and executed with precision, had brought them safely into Soviet hands. The Heinkel, once a symbol of German control and power, now represented ingenuity, daring, and survival against insurmountable odds. As the men debriefed and the aircraft was secured, the story of their escape began to spread among the Soviet units. Pilots, officers, and soldiers listened in awe, drawing inspiration from a single flight that defied expectation and highlighted the extraordinary potential of human courage in the face of war. With the flight behind him and safety assured, Mikhail Devyatayev's journey took on a new dimension. No longer merely a captured pilot or forced laborer, he became a symbol of ingenuity, courage, and the extraordinary possibilities of human determination. His story traveled swiftly through Soviet military channels, reaching commanders, pilots, and soldiers alike, inspiring both awe and admiration. Devyatayev's transition from prisoner to hero was not immediate. He underwent debriefings, medical examinations, and detailed interviews with intelligence officers eager to document every aspect of his daring escape. He recounted the sequences of observation, planning, and execution with meticulous care, ensuring that the lessons learned could inform future operations. In doing so, he transformed his personal survival into strategic knowledge. Soviet propaganda soon recognized the value of his story. Newspapers and bulletins celebrated the audacity of the flight, portraying Devyatayev as an emblem of resilience against overwhelming odds. His courage demonstrated that intelligence, bravery, and improvisation could triumph over rigid enemy systems. He became a figure representing the idea that no barrier, physical or psychological, was insurmountable for those willing to act decisively. Yet the recognition was not only symbolic. Devyatayev received commendations and awards for his bravery, formally acknowledging the risks he had taken and the strategic value of the stolen Heinkel. More importantly, he gained the respect of fellow pilots, engineers, and soldiers, who marveled at his calm under pressure, his technical skill, and his ability to turn a desperate situation into a successful escape. Beyond medals and honors, Devyatayev's story reshaped perceptions of possibility. Fellow POWs, hearing of his flight, were emboldened to consider resistance in ways previously unimagined. Soldiers at the front lines were reminded that courage and ingenuity could bend even the most rigid rules of warfare. Devyatayev had achieved something rare. His survival became a symbol, his flight a blueprint, and his determination a lesson in the power of human agency. For Devyatayev himself, the flight remained deeply personal. The stolen Heinkel was more than a machine. It was freedom realized through intellect, skill, and unwavering resolve. Every mile flown, every maneuver executed, reinforced a simple truth. The human spirit, even under the harshest constraints, can find a path to triumph. His journey from prisoner to hero was complete, a testament to courage and ingenuity that would endure long after the war had ended. Mikhail Devyatayev's daring escape and the stolen Heinkel 111 became more than a wartime anecdote. They left an enduring mark on Soviet aviation and military strategy. Pilots and engineers studied the flight in detail, analyzing the combination of courage, planning, and technical expertise that had made it possible. The Heinkel itself, now in Soviet hands, provided invaluable intelligence on Luftwaffe bomber design, instrumentation, and operational protocols, informing future aircraft development and tactical planning. Devyatayev's example reshaped training and preparation for Soviet pilots. Flight instructors incorporated elements of his improvisation and decision-making into lessons, emphasizing the importance of observation, adaptability, and calm under pressure. His journey illustrated how knowledge of both one's own aircraft and enemy systems could transform a desperate situation into a tactical advantage. Aspiring pilots studied maps and scenarios inspired by his escape, learning that audacity paired with precision could be as effective as raw firepower. The story also inspired broader military doctrine. Commanders recognized that unconventional thinking could circumvent heavily fortified positions, revealing weaknesses even in the most secure installations. Devyatayev's flight became a case study in leveraging skill and ingenuity to exploit enemy vulnerabilities, encouraging creative approaches to operational challenges. For the public, the narrative offered a powerful symbol of resilience and courage. Newspapers, books, and later documentaries recounted the flight, portraying it not only as a physical journey but as a metaphor for human ingenuity, triumphing over adversity. Young pilots, soldiers, and civilians alike drew inspiration from the tale, internalizing the lesson that bravery, intelligence, and careful planning could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. Even decades later, aviation historians and military strategists recognized the significance of Devyatayev's actions. The flight demonstrated that a single, well-executed plan could yield extraordinary results, not only in survival, but in strategic impact. By turning a stolen enemy aircraft into a tool for liberation, Devyatayev had changed the perception of what was possible in wartime aviation. His legacy extended beyond strategy and intelligence. It was a story of human determination, of courage under pressure, and of the enduring power of ingenuity. Mikhail Devyatayev's flight had become more than history. It had become a blueprint for courage, a symbol of freedom, and an inspiration for generations of aviators and strategists alike. The story of Mikhail Devyatayev endured long after the war, transcending the boundaries of military achievement to become a symbol of human courage and resilience. His daring escape from Peenemünde, the theft of a heavily guarded Heinkel 111, and his successful flight to Soviet lines became legendary, celebrated not only for its audacity, but for the ingenuity and precision that made it possible. After the war, Devyatayev continued to serve in the Soviet Air Force, his experience enriching the knowledge and skills of new generations of pilots. His legacy was preserved through military records, training manuals, and countless retellings that emphasized his resourcefulness, calm, under pressure, and unwavering determination. Every story highlighted that the extraordinary acts of ordinary individuals could change the course of events, challenge oppressive systems, and inspire hope. Communities, historians, and aviation enthusiasts honored Devyatayev's courage in exhibitions, documentaries, and biographies. Monuments and memorials were erected in his name, a tangible reminder that his flight was more than a singular escape. It was a moment in history where human ingenuity triumphed over oppression. His heroism was celebrated not only for the flight itself, but for the spirit it represented. The refusal to surrender, the courage to act, and the intelligence to turn opportunity into survival. Even decades later, his story continues to inspire. Pilots, strategists, and civilians alike study the flight, extracting lessons about courage, planning, and the human capacity for ingenuity. The Heinkel, once a weapon of war, became a symbol of liberation, and Devyatayev's journey served as a reminder that freedom could be seized through intelligence, skill, and audacity. Mikhail Devyatayev passed into history not simply as a pilot or a prisoner, but as a testament to what is possible when determination meets opportunity. His flight remains a singular story in the annals of World War II. One man, one bomber, one daring act of liberation that would echo through generations. For the men and women who hear his story today, he is more than a historical figure. He is a hero remembered, a symbol of hope, and an enduring reminder that courage, even in the darkest circumstances, can chart a path to freedom.